why are pastors so afraid? The reason they're afraid of their congregation not giving money to them. They're afraid of the culture coming down on them. They're afraid of the government shutting them down. Well, it's time to man up, and it's time to get right and forget about the culture. What about your eternal destiny? That's the where we need to be. Biblical worldview is extremely important if you want to have a destiny that's with God forever and ever.
Welcome, everybody, to Conversations That Matter. I have some very special returning guests for you today. Col David Giammona. He is a U.S. Army chaplain, retired colonel. He's also an end times scholar, an author, a writer, and he's the president of Battle Ready Ministries. Our other guest is Troy Anderson. He's a Pulitzer Prize nominated investigative journalist. He's written for all of the big boys. You'd be amazed at this man's incredible resume. He's also the best-selling co-author of numerous books, and he's the vice president of Battle Ready Ministries. They're both doing some incredible work. We've had them on before to talk about their previous book, which was also #1 bestseller, The Military Guide to Armageddon. We want to talk to him today about a new book that they are just on the verge of releasing. It's called The Military Guide to Disarming Deception. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the program. And let's just start with a basic question. Deception? Where is this alleged deception? Are we being deceived as Americans, as Christians? How and by whom are we being deceived?
Well, that's a great question. And I think everybody in the audience is probably laughing right now because deception is all around us. Everywhere you turn, it's in the media, it's in the government, it's in schools, education, college, universities, TV, social platforms, you name it, Alex, it's there. And that's why we wrote the book, because we want to be able to guide people through all the things that they're facing right now.
Yeah, I agree. It just feels like we're just drowning in deception. And one of the things that I appreciate most about y'all's work is that you actually name the correct enemy. I agree. This is satanic. This is not just some nebulous forces, not just George Soros. We're literally dealing with satanic deception. Troy, give us some examples of this deception and what purpose it has served, and explain the consequences. I mean, is it a big deal if we're deceived?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe a good place to start is when the disciples asked Jesus, "What were the signs of the last days?" The first thing he said is, "Watch out that no one deceives you." And as the colonel just mentioned, I mean, we're living in a world deluged in deception now. So everything from the pandemic to governmental and military psyops being, it used to be the U.S. military was doing psyops on militaries and countries around the world, but now we're the target of the psyop, the deep state. Just you name it, the media, education, Hollywood, pretty much every social media, every sphere of society is just, deluged in deception. And that's the tactic of the enemy, ultimately of the devil and his fallen angels, but also the tactics being used by, political forces, governments, deep state, across the board.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the purveyors of this misinformation, disinformation, and deception, they act like it's for our own good. We even heard Dr. Fauci famously admit that, I told you not to wear masks, and I kind of did think masks were good, but I didn't want everybody to go out and buy them. So I mean, they're like openly at this point admitting, in many cases, that they're deceiving us. But the way it's presented, at least, is it's for our own good, right? Sometimes you just have to kind of deceive the people a little bit to deceive them. Are there any benefits to this deception, or is this just all evil? And what's the purpose of it ultimately? Why are they doing this?
Deception goes back to the beginning of time. I mean, if you're a Christian, you go back to Genesis. Satan tells through the serpent, tells Adam and Eve, "Did God really say?"
Yeah.
And so, the purpose of deception, all the way through the thousands of years we've been going through it until now, is to make sure that you don't make it to the kingdom of heaven. That's the ultimate deception. and that and Jesus himself said the road is wide that leads to perdition, and the road to heaven is very narrow and few find it. So there is a purpose to deception, and some in our modern era, the purpose is to make out the everybody calm and cool and collected, so we don't protest the mask or the vaccine or whatever else, so they can continue to lie to us through a propaganda machine to make us feel comfortable in their deception.
Yeah, and I want to address in particular some of the deception we've seen around COVID. One of the things that concerned me, I'm not surprised that people that watch CNN were deceived. That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't even alarm me, frankly. But one of the things that really did alarm me was how many Christians and even pastors fell for this. I mean, we had churches that closed for 2 years. Many churches are never going to open again because they bought into this idea that, the pandemic is so serious that we just all have to stop doing the things that God has ordered us to do, like meet together. How vulnerable are Christians? How vulnerable is the church to this deception? When we get back on the other side of the break, I want to talk about how we resist it. But that's one of the things that really bothers me is the deception aimed at Christians and the fact that some Christians still fall for it. How vulnerable are Christians and the church to this deception that we're seeing?
Troy, I'm going to let you go first on that one.
Yeah, so I mean, just like you, Alex, I mean, I was completely surprised by just the sheer number of believers and churches that agreed to shut down. I mean, for 2,000 years, the church has been open, spreading the good news of Jesus Christ, and all of a sudden we have this, this pandemic, and the church largely just capitulates and shuts down. I mean, it was shocking. And then such a large percentage of people just blindly trusted everything the government, all the propaganda, went out and got these vaccines, which are now it's coming out that they may cause more harm than good. The same kind of thing happened in the rise of Nazi Germany. Hitler told a big lie through Goebbels, and the German people bought into it. And so we're sort of seeing a similar thing going on today. There's actually studies out that show that people are hugely influenced by the propaganda and the media. And so that's why we wrote this book, is to help people navigate this, wake up to what's happening, understand that this is the tactic that the devil and the deep state forces of the Great Reset, that they're trying to roll out this new one world system. And so everything we see happening is to try to deceive us. Like the Colonel said, ultimately the goal is to deceive us so we don't make it to heaven, which is a very serious matter involving your eternal soul.
Yep, these eternal consequences here. I hope that has your attention, folks. I want to ask a little bit about the education system too, if you're willing to call it that. I'm not sure I would even use that term anymore. But what role does the education system play in preparing young people, future citizens, future voters for accepting the deception, for being deceived?
Now, Alex, these things have been prepared for decades or over 100 years. When we first started schooling in the United States, it was all about the Bible education. The big league schools, Ivy League schools, you go back and look at their history. They were Bible college for educating pastors. And so Dewey came on the scene and reinvented the entire education system with liberalism. And ever since then, the education system is a propaganda machine for the left, the deep state, and everything else to coerce and to educate and brainwash our children. And so parents, I don't want to sound that, sound the alarm because of the book, but the book spells out what you must do as parents to teach your children. Don't be deceived. Don't send them to a public education if you can possibly afford not to, because they are getting every day inundated with all the propaganda of the deep state. And that's why we're here. We are the mess we're in today, because we got educated by liberals over the decades. More to follow on that. That's a big question.
Yeah, and you guys know me. That's been one of my passions, is trying to show parents and Christians what is happening there. Troy, what do you think? I mean, what role do the public schools play in just setting the stage for these young people to be deceived going forward? Is it significant?
Yeah, so but what many parents may not know is that the United Nations has established this Common Core education, which they've now rolled out worldwide. So a lot of this woke thing, the cancel culture, all the different sort of crazy things we're seeing in the educational system is part of this global educational curriculum that the deep state and the United Nations and different similar bodies are rolling out. And so, I mean, it's having a gigantic impact on our kids. Studies are showing that 60-70% of the kids favor socialism, see themselves as global citizens. It's all trying to prepare and deceive our kids to go along ultimately with whatever kind of plan that the deep state has. The Great Reset, the New World Order. I mean, even President Biden came out recently and said, America needs to lead the New World Order. So they're being very open about this, and they're targeting the younger generations because they know, just like Hitler did. If you can influence the youth, you can take over the whole country eventually.
I want to spend this segment talking about how we actually go about discerning what is deception. And so let's start with the basics. How do we know if we're being lied to by the television, by the media, by what we're seeing on our social media feeds, by what our teachers are teaching our children? How do we know if it's lies or if it's truth? How do we discern that?
Well, the famous joke is if their lips are moving, they're lying.
So true.
But the thing is, in the military, before we go into battle, before we go to war, we spell this out in the book. We go through, a review of what is actually happening in what we call a tactical operations center. Well, the colonel, the battalion commander wants to know who's the enemy, what is their strength, what are their tactics, how are they going to attack us, and where, in what direction. And it's the same in our lives. If we pull that properly over to our civilian lives, we've got to analyze who really is the enemy and what are they after? What's their strength? What are their tactics? Well, the tactics of the enemy is to get you to be deceived. And the only way to overcome that is what the FBI did to train their officers. Not that the FBI is any paragon of virtue, but they train their officers for counterfeit money operations to look at a dollar bill and know it so well they don't have to look at anything else that's fake because they know what the dollar bill looks like. So we have to get smart as people. First of all, go back to the Bible. What does the Bible actually say about things going on right now? It does talk to our lives. It may be old-fashioned. You may not agree with it. But if you go look on the Supreme Court wall right now, those 10 commandments are still there, although they don't follow them. So we have to get back to basics. What is truth? Jesus said, you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So that's the first thing, is getting centered in what is actually true, and how do I know that they're lying to me? So, there are many, many things we can talk about. I'll stop right there and let Troy finish what I just said.
Yeah, Troy, what are some ways you think that Christians and people out there can determine whether they're being lied to or whether they are being given truthful information? And how do we see the truth through the lies?
Yeah, so the first key to discerning the truth is to study the Word of God, because the Bible is full of amazing wisdom, the actual wisdom of God communicated to mankind. So especially if you read the book of Proverbs, portions of the New Testament, you're going to learn a lot of truth, because God is truth, and it conveys that truth, and the Bible will transform your life and your mind and sort of bind you to God's mind. So secondarily, as a journalist for 3 decades, my job is to try to find out what the actual truth is. And so, look at the source of the information you're getting. There's lots of great media out there, like the New American, other conservative and Christian media, that's doing the best job they can to tell people the actual truth of what's really happening. Whereas you have this gigantic segment of the, what's called the mainstream media, that's really become a propaganda arm of the deep state and the government and the CIA and that kind of things. I remember I interviewed Jim Marrs several years ago. He's a New York Times bestselling author, wrote that great book, Ruled by Secrecy. He was an investigative journalist at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and he found out decades ago the CIA had operatives embedded in the editorial boards of newspapers nationwide. That was 20 years ago. Imagine what it's like today. Same thing in Hollywood. So almost everything we're getting bombarded with is some kind of deception, some kind of new worldview that they're trying to communicate to us through movies, social media, and it's all very highly effective. So it's imperative that you get the tools to learn how to discern the truth.
Yeah, and where does worldview fit in here? Because as I see it, what's happening in the schools, there's a whole new worldview being instilled in these children, where they're not looking at the world through a biblical lens; they're looking at the world through a Marxist or a secular humanist lens. So, where does your worldview fit in when trying to figure out what's true, what's false, and how about these fact checkers too? Do they play some role in helping us figure out what's true or not?
Yeah, that's hilarious. Fact checkers. Every time you see fact checkers, you better run because they're not after your best interest. Trust me. They are a part of the left and the propaganda machine. And the truth of the matter is, your question is very valid. And what we have to do, it have to be in discernment of all that, including fact checkers, including the liberal press, including all that. Biblical worldview. They did a Gallup poll recently. Only 6% of Christians have a biblical worldview. And pastors, probably less than that. And a biblical worldview cuts right across the grain of the entire culture, communism, socialism, Marxism, CRT, Black Lives Matter, you name it. A lot of pastors, the reason, you had asked earlier, why are pastors so afraid? The reason they're afraid of their congregation not giving money to them. They're afraid of the culture coming down on them. They're afraid of the government shutting them down. Well, it's time to man up, and it's time to get right and forget about the culture. What about your eternal destiny? That's the where we need to be. Biblical worldview is extremely important if you want to have a destiny that's with God forever and ever. I know I'm starting to preach here, but that's basically where we're at.
I love it. Preach away. But folks, we're down to about 3.5 minutes here. There's so much more that I want to ask, but I've got to ask this. There's a raging debate that I've heard more and more in Christian circles in America about where we're headed. There's the view that's becoming pretty popular that America is done for. The judgment is here. It's over. Get ready. Things are going to get real tough for Christians. And then you have this whole other school of thought that, no, this is just the beginning. We're going to see this great revival, this great awakening. God's going to expose all this deception, expose all this evil. Where do you guys come down on this? Are we headed for increasing trouble, or are things maybe going to get better before Christ returns?
Let me say that first, and I know Troy has wants to respond too, and I'll let that in a moment. But the fact of the matter is, it's a parallel process. The end times have to resolve themselves. The book of Revelation has to come to fruition. There will be a great tribulation. There will be a rise in the Antichrist. There's going to be a global world government. There's no question about it. The question is, when is it going to happen? I'm a very optimistic person. I think God will bring a revival in these end times, but I think it's going to be different this time. I think there's going to be a parallel. As we get closer to the end, many people will get saved, but also at the same time, many people will follow the Antichrist, will follow perdition, and will end up in eternal consequences they don't want to find themselves in.
Troy, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, Alex, there's a verse in the book of Psalms that talk about when the judgments of God are upon the earth, people turn back to God. And I think that's what we're beginning to see now. So I agree with the Colonel. There's going to be this parallel thing happening. We're going to see probably more and more of the judgments, more and more of this chaos moving into the end times. That this is all happening. I've done hundreds of interviews with experts on both sides. Faith leaders. Billy Graham said signs of the end of the age are converging for the first time since Jesus made those predictions. But even experts at existential risk institutes at Princeton and Oxford believe we're approaching the end of human civilization. So there's across the board recognition we're living a very, very dangerous time in history. And so as we see these things, maybe we're at the beginning of the birth pains. I also believe that, there's great hope here. This is the most exciting time to be a believer, to share your faith, to stand up, be courageous, be bold. Could there be this great revival that occurs before the tribulation begins? I certainly hope so. Maybe we're beginning to see people wake up and finally, turn back to God and get right with God. So we could see both things happening at the same time.
Fascinating stuff, gentlemen. We're just about out of time, but what's the best way to get the book? Where if you guys could tell people what's your number one preferred place for people to go buy the book, what's that going to be?
They should go to Amazon. That's where all the book sales are for Books A Million. Anywhere books are sold. And you can go to our website, www.battle-ready.org, to see our books, sign up for our newsletter, see what's going on, all the things that we're doing. So there's a wealth of information out there for you.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for all the great work that you're doing. Thank you for sounding the alarm about the deception and giving people tools and strategies to help see through that. Looking forward to reading the book myself. I can't wait for it to be out, and hopefully we'll get you guys back on very soon. Folks, I'm Alex Newman. This is Conversations That Matter. Please share this out with your friends. You know the fascist social media companies hate us more than they hate you. Appreciate you tuning in. Until next time, God bless you all.